Your father, the Emperor, embodies the ideal. You are destined to follow him, Commodus.
But shadowed by impossible expectations.
He was raised in a world of marble halls and philosophers, a boy destined to rule, but shadowed by impossible expectations.
Born in 161 AD in Lanuvium, near Rome, the son of the great Stoic emperor.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving deep into the heart of ancient Rome. A time of unparalleled power and philosophical grandeur. Imagine, if you will, the Roman Empire at its absolute zenith, sprawling across continents, its roads teeming with trade, its cities adorned with magnificent architecture, and its legions ensuring a pax romana unlike any other. This was the world shaped and governed by one of history's most revered figures, Emperor Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-king. He was a man who, even amidst the immense responsibilities of ruling the known world, found solace and wisdom in Stoic philosophy, penning his timeless meditations. His reign is often considered a golden age, a period of relative peace and prosperity, guided by intellect and virtue. The very air seemed to hum with an almost impossible promise of enduring greatness. And it was into this extraordinary world, a world steeped in wisdom, power, and almost divine expectation, that a new life entered the imperial stage. Our story truly begins in 161 AD, in the ancient town of Lanuvium, not far from the bustling heart of Rome. On that significant day, a son was born to Marcus Aurelius and his wife, Faustina the Younger. This child, destined to inherit the greatest empire the world had ever seen, was named Lucius Aurelius Commodus. Now, think about that for a moment. Born into the lap of luxury, yes, but also into a destiny that few could ever comprehend. Commodus wasn't just born into a wealthy family. He was born into the ultimate family, the imperial dynasty, with a father whose legacy was already immense. He was, quite literally, the child of a philosopher-king, chosen by fate to follow in the footsteps of a man considered by many to be the ideal ruler. His early years were spent within the opulent confines of imperial palaces, marble halls echoing with the hushed voices of scholars and advisors. His playground wasn't a simple village square, but the sprawling gardens of imperial villas, where the most exquisite sculptures and fountains were commonplace. From a very young age, Commodus was surrounded by the best of everything. He had access to the finest teachers, the most brilliant minds of the empire. Philosophers, rhetoricians, historians, all were at his beck and call, tasked with molding this young prince into a worthy successor to Marcus Aurelius. He was taught Latin and Greek, the languages of power and culture. He learned about military strategy, statecraft, and the intricate workings of the vast Roman administration. Every aspect of his education was designed to prepare him for the colossal weight of the purple robe, to equip him with the wisdom, discipline, and moral fortitude of his father. He was groomed not just to be an emperor, but to be a philosopher-emperor, a beacon of Stoic virtue. Imagine the pressure. Every word he spoke, every action he took, was scrutinized, not just by his parents, but by an entire court, by the future of Rome itself. He was held to an almost impossibly high standard, expected to embody the very ideals that his father so eloquently wrote about in his meditations. The weight of expectation must have been crushing, a shadow that followed him through every lesson, every imperial ceremony, every moment of his childhood. His lineage alone set him apart. Marcus Aurelius was not just an emperor. He was a living legend, a man who epitomized duty, reason, and self. For Commodus, this meant that from the moment he could understand, he was measured against the towering figure of his father. His future was mapped out, seemingly predestined. He was the heir apparent, the son of the Golden Age emperor, expected to carry that Golden Age forward, to perhaps even surpass it. The education he received was comprehensive, spanning both intellectual and physical disciplines. He would have trained in horsemanship, wrestling, and the martial arts deemed appropriate for a future commander-in-chief of the Roman legions. But alongside the physical prowess, there was the constant emphasis on intellectual rigor, on understanding the principles of Stoicism virtue, reason, and living in harmony with nature. Yet, despite this meticulous preparation, despite being steeped in the highest ideals of Roman culture and philosophy, Commodus was still just a boy born into a world of immense power. Yes, but also a world that harbored an almost unbearable burden of expectation. His father was a man of profound introspection and moral strength, traits that are often cultivated through hardship and self-discipline, not necessarily inherited. The very air in the imperial palace must have been thick with unspoken hopes and fears for the future of this young prince. Would he truly be able to live up to the legacy? Could he embody the virtues of a philosopher-king? Or would the immense pressure, and perhaps his own inherent nature, lead him down a different path? This is where the story truly becomes fascinating, as we witness the unfolding of a life that defied every expectation laid upon it. So, there you have it, the beginning of our journey with Commodus, the child of a philosopher-king, born into a golden age, yet shadowed by the impossible standards of his father. It's a tale of destiny, expectation, and the often unpredictable nature of human character. What do you think about growing up with such immense pressure? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this dive into Roman history, please give this video a big thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more fascinating stories from the past. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today, we're diving deep into the story of an emperor who had the biggest shoes to fill, arguably in Roman history. We're talking about Commodus, the son of the philosopher Emperor Marcus Aurelius. And this is chapter 2, Raised in the Shadow of Greatness. Imagine being born the son of a living legend. Marcus Aurelius wasn't just an emperor. He was a philosopher, a statesman, a paragon of stoic virtue. His reign, though marred by plagues and wars, is remembered for his wisdom, his introspection, his commitment to duty, and his famous meditations. He believed in self-control, reason, and living in harmony with nature. He taught that true power lay not in external dominion, but in mastering oneself. His life was a testament to the idea that a ruler could be both powerful and profoundly humane, guided by intellect and ethics rather than impulse or ego. He was everything Rome hoped for in a leader, and more. Now, picture his son, Commodus. The expectations on him were colossal. Most on fire. The Roman Empire, weary from years of war and disease, looked to this young prince with eager anticipation, hoping he would be the spitting image of his magnificent father. They yearned for another golden age, another steady hand guided by wisdom and justice. They wanted another Marcus, but from early on, signs began to emerge that Commodus was, shall we say, a different vintage. While Marcus embraced the rigorous discipline of Stoic philosophy, late nights studying texts, early mornings contemplating duty, a life of measured thought and quiet reflection, Commodus seemed to find such pursuits utterly dull. The grand philosophical debates that energized his father left him cold. The pursuit of wisdom didn't spark his interest. The pursuit of pleasure, however, certainly did. He displayed a notable disinterest in intellectual pursuits and the weightier matters of state. Instead, young Commodus gravitated towards more visceral, immediate thrills. He was fascinated by gladiatorial contests, not as a spectator appreciating strategy, but with a passionate, almost obsessive, desire to participate. He spent hours practicing with weapons, honing his physical prowess, dreaming of the roar of the arena rather than the quiet of the Senate House. This wasn't just a casual hobby. It was an early indication of where his true passions lay in action, spectacle, and personal glory, rather than the abstract ideals of governance. And then there was his temper. While Marcus Aurelius famously embodied calm and patience, even in the face of immense pressure, Commodus was prone to outbursts of rage. These weren't the measured frustrations of a leader dealing with difficult decisions. They were volatile eruptions, often disproportionate to the offense. Such a quick temper, combined with a developing vanity, signaled a personality far removed from his father's controlled humility. Marcus wore simple tunics, ate simple food, and avoided Commodus, on the other hand, was already showing a penchant for luxury, for flamboyant displays, and for being the center of attention. This contrast between father and son is stark. Marcus Aurelius understood that true leadership was about service, about sacrificing personal desires for the good of the state. He saw himself as a shepherd to his flock, a guardian of Roman ideals. Commodus, however, seemed to view the empire as his personal playground, a stage for his own self. Where Marcus sought wisdom, Commodus sought adulation. Where Marcus practiced self-restraint, Commodus indulged his impulses. One of the most crucial distinctions between Commodus and almost every great emperor before him was how he came to power. Most previous emperors, even adoptive ones like Trajan or Hadrian, had earned their place. They rose through the ranks, proved their military mettle, demonstrated administrative skill, and often won the respect of the Senate and the people before ascending to the purple. They were made asterisk emperors through merit and experience. Commodus, however, was born to it. He was the first biological son to succeed his father as emperor in nearly a century, since Titus succeeded Vespasian. His lineage, while seemingly a blessing, also denied him the crucible of experience that forged previous leaders. He didn't have to fight for his position. It was simply handed to him. He didn't have to prove his worth in battle or governance. He merely inherited the greatest empire on earth. This lack of earned legitimacy, this absence of a hard-won journey to power, is incredibly significant. It meant he hadn't developed the resilience, the strategic thinking, or the humility that often comes from striving and overcoming challenges. He hadn't faced the trials that shaped his predecessors into capable rulers. Instead, he was accustomed to privilege and instant gratification. While Marcus spent years learning the intricate dance of Roman politics and the harsh realities of military command, Commodus grew up in the comfort of the palace, sheltered from the very experiences that might have tempered his growing flaws. The empire watched, holding its breath. The hope was that these small signs, the temper, the vanity, the disinterest in philosophy, were just youthful indiscretions, things he would outgrow. Surely, they thought, the wisdom of Marcus Aurelius, instilled through years of careful upbringing, would eventually prevail. Surely, the weight of the imperial purple would force him to mature into the leader Rome needed. They desperately wanted him to inherit his father's virtues, to carry on the legacy of the 5 good emperors. But as we'll see, the shadow of greatness can sometimes be too long, too dark, and too suffocating for those who wish to carve their own, often destructive, path. Commodus was destined to be a stark counterpoint to everything his father stood for, setting the stage for one of Rome's most tumultuous periods. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through Roman history. If you found this chapter insightful, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss our next installment. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think it was like for Commodus growing up in his father's shadow? Until next time, stay curious. Hey Everjune, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving deep into the early life of one of Rome's most controversial emperors, Commodus. If you've been following our series, you know we're peeling back the layers on this fascinating historical figure. And trust me, Chapter 3, A Prince in Training, is where things really start to get interesting. Imagine being born into unparalleled power. That was Commodus. From the moment he drew his first breath, he was destined for greatness. Or so it seemed. His father, the revered Marcus Aurelius, had a clear vision for his son, and that vision began with an education fit for a future emperor. Commodus's early years weren't spent building sandcastles like other kids. No, his childhood was a carefully orchestrated curriculum designed to mold him into the next great leader of the Roman Empire. Picture this: a young boy surrounded by the finest minds the empire could offer. He had Greek tutors who instilled in him not just the language, but the philosophies, the literature, and the rhetoric that were the hallmarks of a cultured Roman elite. This wasn't just about memorizing facts. It was about learning to think, to persuade, to govern. He would have been exposed to Homer, to Plato, to the great historians, all shaping his understanding of the world and Rome's place in it. But it wasn't all books and philosophy. A Roman emperor needed to be more than just a scholar. He needed to be a warrior. Commodus underwent rigorous military training. He learned to ride, to wield a sword, to command. These were practical skills, essential for a ruler who might one day lead legions into battle or inspire them from the front. Even if he wasn't always on the front lines, the expectation was that he understood the military, its discipline, and its demands. It was about respect, authority, and projecting an image of strength. And then there was the ultimate classroom, court politics. From a very young age, Commodus was exposed to the intricate dance of power, the whispers in the corridors, the alliances, the rivalries, the delicate balance of imperial administration. He wasn't just observing from a distance. He was often right there, a silent witness to the discussions, the decisions, and the machinations that kept the vast Roman Empire running. This kind of hands-on exposure, almost an apprenticeship, was meant to give him an intimate understanding of governance long before he ever wore the purple. The sheer speed of his ascent through the ranks was truly astonishing. At the tender age of just 5 years old, Commodus was made Caesar. 5. Most kids are just starting school at that age, learning their ABC, but Commodus was being presented to the Roman Senate as a designated successor, a junior partner in the imperial machinery. This move solidified his position, signaling to everyone that he was the chosen one. It was unprecedented for a natural-born son to be elevated so quickly, a clear sign of Marcus Aurelius's desire for a dynastic succession. And then, just over a decade later, the empire watched in awe. As this child, now a 16-year-old, was elevated to co-emperor. 16! The youngest ruler in generations to share such immense power. He was now Augustus, sharing the imperial title with his father, Marcus Aurelius. This wasn't just a ceremonial title. He was actively involved in governing, traveling with his father, attending to affairs of state. The entire Roman world had its eyes on him, full of expectation, hoping he would follow in his father's illustrious footsteps. Imagine the pressure, the weight of an empire resting on such young shoulders. But even amidst this rigorous training and rapid ascent, hints of a different path, a different personality, were already beginning to emerge. Even in his youth, Commodus showed a profound love for luxury. The opulent lifestyle of the imperial court was not just a backdrop for him. It was something he embraced with gusto. Fine clothes, lavish banquets, the most exquisite comforts. These were things he enjoyed immensely. He also developed a strong passion for games and spectacles. The gladiatorial arena, the chariot races. These weren't just state functions to him. They were sources of genuine excitement and entertainment. While many Romans enjoyed these spectacles, for Commodus, it seemed to take on a special significance, perhaps foreshadowing his later obsession. And then there was the flattery. As an emperor in training, surrounded by ambitious courtiers, it was inevitable he would encounter those eager to please. Tu gen favor. And Commodus, it seemed, was receptive to it. He enjoyed being praised, being told what he wanted to hear. This susceptibility to flattery would prove to be a significant vulnerability later in his reign, as sycophants and schemers would exploit it for their own gain. These early tendencies, the love of luxury, the passion for games, and the receptiveness to flattery, were like faint echoes of the man he would become, whispers of the decadence that would eventually define his imperial rule. While Marcus Aurelius strove to instill virtue and duty, these nascent desires were already taking root, waiting for the right conditions to blossom into full-blown imperial indulgence. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Was his destiny set from birth, or did the unique pressures and privileges of his upbringing contribute to the man he became? The empire had high hopes for this young prince, but the seeds of a very different kind of reign were already being sown. What do you think? Were these early signs unavoidable, or could his path have been different? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this dive into Commodus's early life fascinating, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and make sure you hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss our next chapter where we explore Commodus's early reign and the shadow of his father's legacy. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Alright everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most fascinating and pivotal moments in Roman history. A moment that shaped an empire and defined the legacy of two emperors, Marcus Aurelius and his son, Commodus. We're in chapter 4 of our series, titled A Campaign with His Father. Imagine this. It's 178 AD. The air is thick with the chill of winter, and the vast, ancient forests of Germania stretch out endlessly. This isn't the sun-drenched marble of Rome. This is the harsh, untamed frontier. And here, in a makeshift camp amidst the cold, dense woods, we find Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor, and his young, ambitious son, Commodus. Marcus Aurelius, despite the biting cold and the constant threat of barbarian incursions, finds solace in his thoughts. The flickering candlelight illuminates his tent, casting long shadows as he meticulously pens his private reflections. What we now know as his meditations. His brow is furrowed, not from discomfort, but from deep contemplation. Each stroke of his quill is deliberate, a testament to a mind grappling with duty, mortality, virtue, and the immense burden of ruling the known world. He writes about the fleeting nature of life, the importance of inner peace, and the stoic acceptance of fate. For him, this desolate landscape isn't just a battlefield. It's a crucible for the soul, a place where true character is forged against adversity. He finds wisdom in the silence, purpose in the struggle, and clarity in the stark reality of the northern frontier. But just beyond the thin canvas of his tent, perhaps in an adjacent, slightly less austere dwelling, lies Commodus. He's young, barely out of his teenage years, and the wisdom his father cherishes seems utterly alien to him. Commodus is restless. The endless expanse of trees, the bitter wind, the constant vigilance against unseen enemies. It all grates on him. He sees no glory in the quiet contemplation of his father. His mind isn't on philosophy. It's on the vibrant, exhilarating world he left behind in Rome. He dreams of the roaring crowds in the Colosseum, the thrill of gladiatorial combat, the lavish feasts, the beautiful women, the intoxicating power that awaited him as the future emperor, the strategic councils, the grim realities of military life, the austere discipline. These are tedious distractions. He longs for the cheers of the populace, the opulent grandeur of the palace, the unbridled indulgence that Rome offered in abundance. He yearns for a different kind of glory, one earned through spectacle and adulation, not through quiet endurance and intellectual struggle. This scene, so simple yet so profound, paints a stark contrast between two vastly different approaches to life, leadership, and power. Marcus Aurelius, with his aging hands and weary but resolute spirit, embodies the pinnacle of Stoic philosophy and dedicated service. He's trying to instill the same values in his son, to teach him the weight of the diadem, the responsibility that comes with absolute power. He knows that true strength lies not in physical prowess or material wealth, but in mental fortitude and moral integrity. He's writing not for an audience, but for himself, to guide his own actions and thoughts, to prepare for the inevitable trials ahead. He's leaving behind a legacy of thought, a guide for humanity. Commodus, however, is a whirlwind of youthful impatience and unchecked ambition. He sees the empire not as a sacred trust, but as a personal playground, a stage for his own theatrical performance. He respects his father's authority, of course, but he struggles to understand his father's profound dedication to duty and intellectual pursuit in such a harsh environment. He's bored by the discussions of supply lines and tactical maneuvers. He's more interested in imagining himself as a triumphant warrior, adorned with laurels, returning to a hero's welcome. The cold, the discomfort, the intellectual demands, they are all just obstacles between him and the dazzling, hedonistic life he craves. The quiet scene within the tent, Marcus writing by candlelight, becomes a powerful symbol. It represents the dying embers of a philosophical reign, a golden age of reason and self, and the restless energy of Commodus outside, dreaming of pleasure and spectacle, foreshadows the dawn of an era driven by ego, extravagance, and ultimately, tyranny. This campaign in Germania was meant to be a bonding experience, a mentorship, a transfer of wisdom from father to son. But for Commodus, it largely served as a period of profound disillusionment and a sharpening of his desire for a life antithetical to his father's principles. The cold forests of Germania, therefore, weren't just a physical battleground for the Roman legions. They were a psychological arena where two opposing philosophies of leadership, life, and destiny. One father, a beacon of wisdom, painstakingly tried to guide his son. Another son, brimming with unbridled desire, looked past the wisdom to the glittering superficialities of power. This chapter truly sets the stage for the dramatic and often tragic events that would follow, shaping the very trajectory of the Roman Empire. What do you think about this pivotal moment? Can you imagine yourself in Commodus's shoes? Or do you relate more to Marcus Aurelius's stoic dedication? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please give this video a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe for more journeys into the heart of history. Your support means the world to us. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next chapter. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into a pivotal moment in Roman history. A true turning point that marks the end of an era. We're talking about Chapter 5. The death of the philosopher-king, Marcus Aurelius. Imagine, if you will, the year 180 AD. The Roman Empire, at its absolute zenith, stretched across vast lands, a beacon of civilization, law, and order. And at its helm, a man unlike any other emperor before or after him, Marcus Aurelius. For nearly 2 decades, he had guided Rome, not just with military might, but with profound wisdom, stoic philosophy, and a deep sense of duty. He was the very last of what history would lovingly call the 5 good emperors. A golden age, truly, but even golden ages must eventually fade. Our story takes us to the bleak military camps of Vindobona, modern-day Vienna, on the harsh northern frontier. This wasn't a place of imperial luxury, but a rugged outpost where Rome's legions faced constant threats from Germanic tribes. For years, Marcus Aurelius had been there, leading from the front, enduring the hardships alongside his soldiers, not as a distant ruler, but as a general, a strategist, and a philosopher. He was battling not just the Marcomanni, but also time and illness. The air in the camp would have been thick with the scent of damp earth, wood smoke, and the metallic tang of military life. Tensions were high, but so was the emperor's resolve. He was a man who lived by his principles, even in the face of immense pressure and personal suffering. His Meditations, a timeless work of stoic philosophy, was a personal journal, a conversation with himself on how to live a virtuous life, how to face adversity, and how to accept the inevitable. And in 180 AD, the inevitable arrived. Marcus Aurelius, the last of the philosopher-kings, succumbed to an illness. The exact cause is debated, perhaps plague, perhaps a debilitating stomach ailment. But the outcome was undeniable. The great emperor, the man who had strived for justice, wisdom, and temperance, breathed his last. Can you imagine the quiet, profound shock that must have rippled through that military camp? To whispers the disbelief, the palpable sense of loss. It wasn't just an emperor who had died. It was an ideal. He wasn't just a ruler. He was a moral compass for an entire empire. His death wasn't just a political event. It was the end of a philosophical experiment, a dream of what enlightened leadership could be. With Marcus Aurelius's passing, a literal torch was passed, not to an adopted, highly capable successor, chosen for their merit and character, as had been the tradition of the previous 4 good emperors. No, this time, the torch passed to his biological son, Commodus. And with that single succession, a pattern of nearly a century of stable, prosperous rule was broken. The news of his death would have traveled slowly, carried by messengers on horseback across the vast Roman roads, eventually reaching the capital. Rome itself, the eternal city, would have been plunged into a deep mourning. Not just a ceremonial mourning, but a genuine sense of loss for a leader who had been so deeply respected, even revered. The citizens would have understood the significance. The golden age of the Pax Romana, this incredible period of peace and prosperity, was drawing to a close. The 5 good emperors Nerva, Trajan, Adrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius represented an era of unparalleled stability and growth for Rome. They were chosen not by birthright, but by adoption, selecting the most capable men to govern. This system had worked wonders, creating an almost seamless transition of power and ensuring excellent leadership. Marcus Aurelius was the culmination of that system, embodying its highest ideals. His death marked the final chapter of this unique and remarkably successful period. And what followed? Well, the immediate aftermath was the reign of Commodus. And without giving too much away about future chapters, let's just say his rule was dramatically different. The golden glow began to dim, and a new, decidedly darker chapter in Roman history was about to unfold. The peace and philosophical leadership gave way to instability, extravagance, and a profound shift in how power was wielded. So, as we reflect on Marcus Aurelius's death, it's more than just a historical date. It is a poignant reminder of the fragility of even the greatest empires and the immense impact a single leader, or the lack thereof, can have. It reminds us of the profound power of philosophy and leadership, and the bittersweet truth that all golden ages must eventually give way to new realities. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through Roman history. What are your thoughts on Marcus Aurelius and the end of the 5 good emperors? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this dive into the past, please hit that like button. Subscribe for more historical insights. And don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Your support truly helps this channel grow, and I appreciate every single one of you. See you in the next chapter. Welcome back to our series on the Roman emperors. Today, we're diving into chapter 6. The young emperor returns to Rome. Imagine this. The year is 180 AD. The great philosopher-emperor, Marcus Aurelius, is gone. The weight of the world's mightiest empire now rests on the shoulders of his son, Commodus, and he's only 19 years old. As Commodus makes his grand entrance back into Rome, the city erupts. He's not just an emperor. He's a returning hero, a symbol of hope and continuity. The crowds roar, hailing him as a savior. Triumphal parades snake through the streets. Flowers are thrown, and his name is chanted like a prayer. For a young man, this is intoxicating. He is the center of the universe, adored by millions. At first, he basks in this glory. Who wouldn't? He is the most powerful man on earth, and the people love him. The celebrations are endless. The praise is constant. He is a living god in the eyes of many. But ruling an empire isn't just about parades and applause. It's about long hours, complex decisions, and endless administrative tasks. It's about managing supply lines, hearing legal disputes, and dealing with political intrigue. It's hard work, and for a 19-year-old who has just tasted the sweetest fruits of power, the day-to-day grind of governing quickly loses its appeal. The novelty wears off faster than anyone could have predicted. The long meetings in the Senate, boring. Reading petitions from distant provinces, tedious. Balancing the imperial budget, a complete nightmare. Commodus starts to feel the immense pressure, not of responsibility, but of boredom. He looks at the mountain of paperwork and the endless line of senators and officials waiting for his attention, and he sees a cage. A golden cage? Yes, but a cage nonetheless. He desires freedom, pleasure, and excitement, not the dry, dutiful life of his father. So, he makes a choice, a fateful choice that will change the course of Roman history. He decides to delegate. He hands over the reins of government to his trusted advisors and chamberlains. Let them deal with the grain shortages and the barbarian threats. Let them handle the tedious business of running the empire. He has more important things to do. And what are those things? He begins to immerse himself in a world of unparalleled luxury and indulgence. The imperial palace transforms from a center of government into a playground for the emperor. The finest foods, the most expensive wines, lavish parties that last for days. This becomes Commodus's new reality. He surrounds himself with a court of flatterers and companions who cater to his every whim, telling him what he wants to hear, that he is magnificent, that he deserves this life of pleasure, that the tiresome work of ruling is beneath him. His focus shifts from the welfare of the Roman people to his own personal gratification. He spends fortunes on exotic animals, extravagant games, and opulent decorations, while his advisors, like Berenice, govern in his name. Commodus indulges in his passions. One of his greatest passions is the arena. But he isn't content to just be a spectator. No, he wants to be a participant. He begins training as a gladiator. This is a shocking, scandalous move for an emperor. Gladiators were often slaves or criminals, the lowest rung of society. For the emperor, the embodiment of Roman dignity, to step into the arena was unthinkable. But Commodus doesn't care about tradition or dignity. He cares about the roar of the crowd, the thrill of combat, the adoration of the masses not as a ruler, but as a star athlete. He sees himself as a modern-day Hercules, a divine hero walking among mortals. He even starts dressing like Hercules, complete with a lion skin cloak and a club. To him, this isn't just a hobby. It's his true calling. He believes he is a physical marvel, a perfect specimen of a man, and he wants everyone to see it. While the Senate quietly fumes and the old god looks on in horror, the common people of Rome are often thrilled. They get to see their emperor, their god, fighting beasts and men in the Colosseum. It's the greatest show on earth. But behind this spectacle, the foundations of the empire are starting to crack. Corruption becomes rampant as his chosen officials use their power to enrich themselves. Plots and conspiracies begin to brew within the palace walls, even within his own family. His sister, Lucilla, who once held great influence, now sees her brothers squandering their father's legacy. She sees the danger he represents and begins to plot against him. The young savior who returned to Rome in a blaze of glory is slowly becoming a tyrant, isolated by his own desires and surrounded by enemies he can't even see. The dream of a golden age, which began with his father, is rapidly turning into a nightmare. The young emperor, so full of promise, has abandoned his duty for pleasure, trading the burden of the crown for the thrill of the sword. The story of Commodus is a tragic tale of what can happen when absolute power is given to someone who craves adoration but despises responsibility. And we're just getting started. The conspiracies, the betrayals, and the shocking finale of his reign are yet to come. Thank you so much for watching. If you're fascinated by this incredible period of history, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapter in this epic story. We'll see you in the next video. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're re-diving deep into a fascinating and often overlooked aspect of Roman history. The powerful figures behind Emperor Commodus. We're talking about the hands that truly steered the empire, often right into turbulent waters. So, buckle up, because this is chapter 7 of our Commodus series, and it's all about the hands of power, his advisors. You see, when Commodus first took the throne, he was incredibly young, and frankly, a bit overwhelmed by the immense responsibility. This left a massive power vacuum, an open invitation for ambitious individuals to step in and effectively run the show. Our story begins with two major players who quickly rose to prominence: Titidius Perennis, and later, Gladiator. Imagine the Roman Empire, the most powerful force in the Western world, being run not by its emperor, but by those whispering in his ear. It's a classic tale, but with very real and devastating consequences. Let's start with Perennis. He was a Praetorian prefect, a position of immense military and administrative authority. In essence, he was the commander of the emperor's personal guard and a key advisor. Perennis was a shrewd operator, a master manipulator who understood exactly how to leverage his influence. He quickly realized Commodus wasn't particularly interested in the nitty-gritty of governance. Commodus was more into gladiatorial contests, lavish entertainment, and frankly, avoiding the heavy burden of leadership. This disinterest was Perennis's golden ticket. Perennis effectively became the de facto ruler of Rome. He started consolidating power, pushing out rivals, and making sure that anyone who had Commodus's ear was someone Perennis approved of. Think about it. If you wanted something done, if you wanted a promotion, if you needed a decree passed, you didn't go to Commodus, you went to Perennis. He controlled access to the emperor, making himself an indispensable gatekeeper. This kind of power, unchecked, almost always leads to trouble. And trouble it did lead to. One of the most insidious ways Perennis exploited his position was through the practice of selling offices. That's right, he was literally putting important government and military positions up for sale to the highest bidder. Imagine a system where merit means nothing and wealth means everything. This wasn't just about Perennis getting rich. It fundamentally corrupted the Roman administration. Instead of competent, dedicated individuals leading legions or governing provinces, you had wealthy, often unqualified, individuals buying their way into power. This eroded public trust and severely weakened the empire's efficiency and integrity. The military, in particular, suffered. Commanders were chosen based on their ability to pay perennies, not their tactical genius or experience. This obviously caused huge resentment among professional soldiers and officers who had dedicated their lives to service. The Praetorian Guard, who were supposed to be loyal to the emperor, found their loyalty increasingly divided as Perennies controlled their promotions and careers. It was a dangerous game, and eventually, Perennies' greed and unchecked power would catch up to him. His downfall was swift and brutal, orchestrated by those he had alienated, and ultimately approved by a Commodus, who finally saw the extent of the Praetorian prefect's power grab. But the vacuum left by Perennies didn't stay empty for long. Enter Clender, another incredibly ambitious and even more audacious figure. Clender started as a mere chamberlain, a servant in the emperor's household, but he possessed an uncanny ability to charm and manipulate Commodus. He knew exactly what Commodus wanted to hear and how to make himself indispensable. While Perennies was more subtle, Clender was bolder, and his influence grew exponentially. Clender's rise to power is truly remarkable. From a freedman, he ascended to become one of the most powerful men in the empire, eventually even holding the unique position of a Pugion, keeper of the dagger and a cubiculo chamberlain, effectively controlling access to Commodus in his private quarters. He became the emperor's most trusted confidant, the one person Commodus truly relied on, or so he thought. Like Perennies, Clender engaged in extensive corruption. In fact, he took it to an entirely new level. He didn't just sell offices. He created new ones just to sell them. He'd churn through officials, appointing and dismissing them at a rapid pace, simply to collect more money from new appointees. He was like a human ATM for Commodus, constantly generating revenue for the emperor's lavish spending and for his own immense personal fortune. Imagine the chaos this caused within the administration. No stability, no long-term planning, just a constant reshuffling motivated by greed. The Roman Empire slowly but surely began to rot from within. The public, already burdened by heavy taxes and increasingly ineffective governance, watched in dismay as corruption became rampant at the highest levels. The selling of offices meant that justice itself could be bought, and favoritism reigned supreme. This wasn't just a few bad apples. It was systemic corruption that permeated every layer of society touched by the imperial administration. People lost faith in the system, and that's a dangerous place for any empire to be. As all this corruption unfolded, what was Commodus doing? Well, he was turning inward. He retreated further and further from the responsibilities of governing. He was happier performing as a gladiator in the arena, believing himself to be Hercules incarnate than dealing with state affairs. He left the day-to-day running of the empire to his advisors, effectively delegating imperial power to individuals like Perennies and Clender. He surrounded himself with flatterers and indulged his increasingly bizarre delusions of grandeur. The serious business of running a vast empire became a secondary concern to his personal entertainment and self-aggrandizement. Now, let's introduce another crucial figure, one who often gets less attention but played a significant role, particularly in Commodus's personal life and later in his downfall. Marcia. Marcia was Commodus's mistress, but she was no ordinary concubine. She was a freed woman who held considerable influence over the emperor. Unlike Perennies and Clender, whose power derived from formal positions, Marcia's power came from her intimate access and emotional sway over Commodus. She was intelligent and politically aware, and many sought her favor to gain access to the emperor. Marcia is particularly interesting because she was unnecessarily driven by the same naked ambition for wealth or administrative power as the men. She was a devout Christian, which was highly unusual for someone in her position at that time, given the persecution of Christians. Her influence often involved protecting Christians or interceding on their behalf, a remarkable historical detail. However, her influence also became critical at a pivotal moment in Commodus's reign. As Clender's corruption reached its peak, a massive famine struck Rome, partly due to his mismanagement and hoarding of grain. The people were starving and furious. A massive riot erupted in Rome, with the populace chanting Clender's name, demanding his execution. The Praetorian Guard struggled to control the mob. It was Marcia who, witnessing the chaos and fearing for Commodus's own safety, intervened. She convinced Commodus that Clender was a threat, that his unchecked power and the public's hatred of him were endangering the emperor himself. Her intervention was decisive. Commodus, pressured by Marcia and perhaps finally seeing the danger Clender posed to his own person, ordered Clender's execution. It was a dramatic end to a corrupt reign of power, proving that even the most powerful advisors could fall when their usefulness, or rather, their danger, became apparent to the emperor. So, what can we learn from all this? The story of Commodus's advisors is a stark reminder of what happens when power goes unchecked, when an emperor abdicates his responsibilities, and when corruption becomes systemic. The empire, which had seen periods of immense strength and good governance, slowly began to unravel under the weight of venality and incompetence at its highest levels. The legacy of Perennis, Clenda, and even Marcia shows how personal relationships and unchecked ambition can dramatically alter the course of history, shaping not just an emperor's reign but the fate of an entire civilization. These figures didn't just manipulate Commodus, they manipulated the very fabric of Roman society, setting the stage for even more instability and decline in the years to come. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the fascinating world of Commodus' advisors. It's a complex period, but understanding these key figures helps us grasp the bigger picture. If you found this insightful, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more historical explorations, and let me know in the comments below what you think about these powerful figures behind the throne. I love hearing your thoughts. See you in the next chapter. All right, history buffs and curious minds, welcome back to our deep dive into the life of one of Rome's most enigmatic emperors. We're picking up right where we left off, and things are getting intense. If you thought Commodus's reign was wild before, buckle up, because today we're diving headfirst into Chapter 8, a growing paranoia. BD's point, Commodus wasn't just a young emperor flexing his power. He was a man increasingly isolated, and the whispers around him were growing louder. These weren't just idle rumors. They were tales of plots, conspiracies, and betrayals that began to gnaw at his mind. Imagine being at the absolute pinnacle of power, with the entire Roman Empire at your feet, yet feeling like everyone around you is secretly plotting your downfall. That's the suffocating reality Commodus started to experience. The line between genuine threats and imagined enemies blurred completely. Commodus, once adored by many as the son of the great Marcus Aurelius, began to see shadows everywhere. It wasn't just the obvious political rivals. His paranoia spread like a disease through the imperial court. Senators, those wise and influential figures who formed the backbone of Roman governance, suddenly became suspect. Their ancient lineage, their vast wealth, their very intelligence, all could be interpreted as a potential threat to the emperor. And it wasn't just senators. Even his most trusted generals, men who had led legions to victory and swore allegiance to Rome and its emperor, found themselves under the microscope. Their military prowess, their popularity with the troops. These strengths, once celebrated, now seemed dangerous in Commodus's eyes. A successful general might inspire loyalty in his soldiers, and that loyalty, in a paranoid mind, could easily turn into a challenge to imperial authority. But perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of this growing paranoia was its reach into his own family. Imagine not being able to trust those closest to you, those who share your blood and your history. Commodus began to suspect his relatives, his own sisters, aunts, and cousins, seeing them not as allies, but as potential rivals for the throne. The warmth of family ties was replaced by a chilling suspicion, turning love and kinship into a breeding ground for fear and distrust. This wasn't just idle suspicion. It had very real and often brutal consequences. Executions, once reserved for the most heinous crimes against the state, multiplied at an alarming rate. It became a terrifying trend, a chilling demonstration of imperial wrath. People of high standing, respected figures within Roman society, could find themselves accused, condemned, and executed with dizzying speed, often based on little more than a whisper or a misinterpreted glance. The once clear legal processes of Rome were twisted and bypassed, replaced by the emperor's increasingly erratic judgments. Exiles also became commonplace. Rather than outright execution, some prominent figures were simply stripped of their titles, their wealth, and their influence, and banished from Rome, never to return. This was a form of political death, removing potential threats from the imperial capital, but also serving as a stark warning to anyone else who might harbor ambitions or even just critical thoughts. The message was clear. Dissent, or even the perception of dissent, would not be tolerated. And then there were the betrayals. It wasn't just Commodus betraying his former allies. The climate of fear bred a new kind of treachery. People began to betray each other, hoping to curry favor with the emperor, or to divert his suspicion from themselves onto someone else. Friends turned on friends. Colleagues denounced colleagues, and family members, fearing for their own lives, might even implicate their kin. The court became a viper's nest, where trust was a luxury no one could afford, and survival often depended on who could denounce whom first. The boy who was once adored, the charismatic young emperor, the son of the revered Marcus Aurelius, was now a figure of terror. His name, once synonymous with imperial hope, now evoked fear and apprehension. The Roman people, who had initially celebrated his ascension, now lived under a cloud of uncertainty, never knowing who would be the next target of his growing paranoia. The bright promise of his early reign had faded, replaced by a brooding darkness. This shift wasn't just about Commodus's personal descent. It profoundly impacted the stability of the entire empire. When the ruler is unstable, the state itself trembles. The constant fear, the arbitrary executions, and the erosion of trust within the governing class created an environment ripe for further intrigue and instability. The empire, which had enjoyed a period of relative peace and prosperity under Marcus Aurelius, was now being slowly eaten away from within by its own emperor's mind. It's a powerful lesson in how unchecked power, combined with a fragile psyche, can unravel even the mightiest of empires. Commodus's paranoia wasn't just a personal struggle. It became a destructive force that reshaped Rome's destiny. The legacy of his father, the philosopher-emperor, was increasingly overshadowed by the terrifying reality of the son. As we move forward, I'll see how this spiraling paranoia eventually led to a dramatic and definitive turning point in Commodus's reign. But for now, take a moment to reflect on the sheer weight of absolute power and the psychological toll it can take. Thank you so much for joining me on this fascinating, albeit dark, journey through Roman history. Your engagement means the world. If you found this historical deep dive compelling, please hit that like button, share this video with fellow history enthusiasts, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on what happens next. Your support helps us bring more incredible stories from the past to life. Stay curious, and I'll see you in the next chapter. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving headfirst into Chapter 9 of our epic journey through history, exploring a period that truly redefined opulence and, well, a little bit of madness. Get ready to witness Rome transform, not just into an empire, but into one man's personal playground. We're talking about Commodus and how his reign became an absolute spectacle of self-worship. Imagine this: the grandeur of Rome, the seat of an empire, now draped in silk, echoing with laughter from endless banquets, and glittering with golden statues. Not statues of revered ancestors or mighty gods, but golden statues of the emperor himself, often depicted as the demigod Hercules. Can you even picture it? This wasn't just about luxury. It was about an emperor who saw himself as a living deity, a hero among men, destined for eternal glory in his own image. His world was one of constant celebration, where the rules of normal society simply didn't apply. His banquets weren't just meals. They were theatrical events, elaborate feasts designed to showcase his boundless wealth and power. Think exotic dishes, endless rivers of fine wine, and entertainment that pushed every boundary. Commodus didn't just attend these gatherings. He was the star, the main attraction, reveling in the adoration and fear of those around him. Every dish, every performance, every piece of decor was a testament to his supreme indulgence. He wasn't just dining, he was performing his status for an audience that had no choice but to applaud. But his ego didn't stop at banquets and statues. Oh no. Commodus decided that the very fabric of time and space needed to bend to his will. He literally began renaming the months of the year after his own titles and epithets. Picture this: Instead of July or August, you might have a Commodus, Hercules, or Invictus. It's an almost unbelievable display of narcissism, an attempt to stamp his personal brand not just on the present, but on every single day, month after month, year after year. He wanted his name to be whispered by every Roman every time they consulted a calendar. And then, for the ultimate act of self-glorification, he decided Rome itself wasn't grand enough. The eternal city, the capital of the known world, needed a new name. His name? So, Rome, the mighty, historic city, was to be officially renamed Colonia Commodiana. Can you imagine the audacity, the sheer nerve of an emperor attempting to wipe away centuries of history and tradition with a stroke of his pen, simply to cement his own legacy? It wasn't just a name change. It was a symbolic takeover, an act that declared unequivocally that Rome now belonged to him, body and soul. This wasn't just a political move. It was a psychological transformation of the empire. His reign became a continuous, extravagant performance, a theater of self-worship, where Commodus was the writer, director, and sole star. The entire Roman world became his stage, and every citizen, whether they liked it or not, was a member of his captive audience. He seemed to live in an alternate reality, where the empire existed solely to reflect his greatness back to him. It's truly fascinating to observe how absolute power, unchecked, can warp perception and lead to such extreme displays. Commodus wasn't just ruling. He was living out a fantasy, blurring the lines between emperor, god, and superstar. He believed he was destined for greatness, and he was determined to leave an indelible mark, even if that mark was etched in gold and covered in silk with his face on every coin and his name on every month. The story of Colonia Commodiana and the emperor who renamed the months is a powerful reminder of how ambition and ego, when left unchecked, can lead to truly extraordinary, and sometimes bizarre, historical chapters. It makes you wonder what kind of advice he was getting, or rather, not getting. What do you think about Commodus's grand gestures? Was it pure madness, or a calculated display of power? Let me know in the comments below. If you found this dive into Roman excess as fascinating as I did, please hit that like button, share this video with your history-loving friends, and don't forget to subscribe for more journeys through the past. Your support means the world, and I can't wait to see you in the next chapter. Thanks for watching. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into one of the most unbelievable stories from ancient Rome. A chapter so wild, it almost sounds like fiction. We're talking about Emperor Commodus and how he became the Gladiator emperor. Now, when you think of Roman emperors, you probably picture stoic leaders, brilliant generals, or even ruthless tyrants. But Commodus, he decided to trade his purple toga for a gladiatorial helmet and step into the arena himself. This isn't just a quirky footnote in history. It's perhaps the most famous, and certainly the most scandalous, part of his entire reign. Imagine the scene: the Colosseum, packed to the rafters, the roar of tens of thousands of spectators, and in the center, not a professional gladiator, but the Emperor of Rome, ready to fight. For Commodus, this wasn't just a hobby. It was a deeply personal obsession. He genuinely saw himself as the reincarnation of Hercules, the mighty hero of Greek mythology. He'd wear a lion-skin cape, carry a club, and even styled his hair and beard to resemble the demigod. The arena was his stage, his temple, where he could prove his divine strength and virtue to the Roman people. And boy, did he put on a show. He didn't just make a few token appearances. He reportedly fought hundreds, if not thousands, of times. We're talking about an emperor who preferred the smell of dust and blood in the arena to the scent of parchment in the Senate House. Now, you might be thinking, wow, an emperor fighting gladiators? That's insane. And you'd be right, but it gets even crazier. Commodus wasn't just fighting seasoned, professional gladiators. Oh no. His opponents were often carefully selected to ensure his victory. We're talking about men who were crippled, disarmed, or even prisoners who had no chance of winning. He would also take on wild beasts, bears, lions, even elephants. But again, these animals were often caged, restrained, or even drugged to make sure Commodus emerged victorious, showering him with glory and adoration from the masses. To the common people of Rome, this was often thrilling entertainment. They loved a spectacle, and seeing their emperor risk his life, or at least appearing to, was an unparalleled thrill. It was a connection to power they rarely experienced. He was their hero, their Hercules reborn, the ultimate warrior. Each victory, each triumphant salute, fueled his ego and solidified his self-image. He reveled in the cheers, the applause, the sheer energy of the crowd. For a man who often felt isolated and perhaps insecure in his role, the arena offered pure, unadulterated adulation. But while the crowds roared, the Roman Senate and the aristocratic elite were absolutely appalled. To them, an emperor fighting as a gladiator was not just it was a grotesque humiliation of their sacred office. Emperors were meant to be figures of gravitas, wisdom, and military prowess, leading armies and administering justice. To descend into the vulgarity of the arena, to mimic slaves and criminals, was an insult to Roman tradition and an affront to everything they held dear. They saw it as Commodus debasing himself, dragging the entire Roman Empire down with him. Imagine your country's leader showing up on a reality TV show as a contestant, but with life or death stakes. It was completely unthinkable for them. This wasn't just about personal taste. It was about the very fabric of Roman society. Gladiators, despite their fame, were largely drawn from the lowest rungs of society's slaves, criminals, and prisoners of war. An emperor, the supreme ruler, was meant to be above such things. For Commodus to not only engage in these fights but to openly identify with gladiators was seen as a grave dereliction of duty and a sign of profound mental instability. The Senate fumed in secret, their frustration mounting with every staged victory, every new Hercules costume Commodus donned. They believed he was squandering the legacy of his father, the revered Marcus Aurelius, and disgracing the imperial purple. The tension between Commodus and the Senate grew unbearable. His gladiatorial antics weren't just a symptom of his eccentric personality. They became a symbol of his increasingly tyrannical and unpredictable rule. He held extravagant games, lavishing money on spectacles while Rome faced economic challenges. He even demanded to be worshipped as a living god, adding temples to himself and renaming months after his own titles. His actions in the arena were a public declaration of his disdain for tradition and the established order. It was a power play, a way to assert his absolute authority and mock those who dared to question him. It was signing, "I am the emperor, I can do whatever I please, and you will cheer for me." But even an emperor's luck can run out. While he was always victorious in the staged battles of the arena, his political enemies were growing stronger and more desperate. The humiliation, the extravagance, the capricious cruelty of his reign pushed many beyond their breaking point. His love for the arena, once a source of popular approval, eventually became another reason for his downfall. The very people he delighted in impressing, the common citizens, eventually grew weary of his increasingly bizarre behavior and the burden of his lavish spending. The story of Commodus, the gladiator emperor, reminds us that even absolute power doesn't guarantee a sensible reign, and that the line between spectacle and leadership can become dangerously blurred. His life serves as a fascinating, if tragic, example of an emperor who lost touch with the realities of governance, choosing the fleeting glory of the arena over the enduring responsibilities of the throne. It's a tale that continues to captivate historians and storytellers alike, proving that sometimes truth is far stranger and more dramatic than fiction. What do you think about Commodus's gladiatorial obsession? Was he a madman, a misunderstood showman, or something else entirely? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed this deep dive into ancient Rome, and be sure to subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories from history. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Hello history lovers, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving deep into the reign of one of Rome's most eccentric and megalomaniacal, Emperor Commodus. We've seen how his early years were marked by vanity and a disinterest in governance. But now we enter a chapter where his ego spirals into something else entirely, a divine delusion that would reshape the very fabric of Rome. How does an emperor go from being the son of a philosopher-king to declaring himself a living god? Let's find out. When Marcus Aurelius, the last of the 5 good emperors, passed away, the Roman Empire was unknowingly handed over to a man who would prioritize his own ego above all else. Commodus, his son and successor, wasn't interested in the tedious work of administration or the gritty realities of military campaigns. His passions lay elsewhere. In the roar of the Colosseum crowd and in the reflection he saw in the mirror reflection he increasingly believed was not just of a man, but of a deity. The transformation wasn't instantaneous. It was a slow burn, a gradual escalation of vanity. At first, it was subtle. He'd adopt titles that hinted at his special status, names that associated him with greatness. But soon, subtlety was thrown to the wind. Commodus began to believe he was the reincarnation of Hercules, the legendary demigod hero known for his incredible strength and 12 labors. This wasn't just a casual comparison. It was a deeply held conviction that he was the living embodiment of the hero. To solidify this new identity, Commodus started appearing in public, dressed not in the traditional purple toga of an emperor, but in a lionskin cloak, just like the one Hercules wore after defeating the Nemean lion. He would carry a heavy club, another signature attribute of the hero. Imagine the sight for the average Roman citizen. Their emperor, the head of the world's greatest empire, parading around as a figure from myth and legend. It was bizarre, unsettling, and a complete break from the dignified tradition of his predecessors. This wasn't just a personal fantasy. It was state-sanctioned policy. The Roman mint, which produced the currency used across the empire, began to issue coins that reflected Commodus's divine aspirations. On these coins, his portrait was often depicted with the attributes of Hercules. Inscriptions hailed him with new, grandiose titles. He wasn't just Caesar or Augustus anymore. He was Hercules, Romanus, Augustus. Roman Hercules. The Roman Hercules, Augustus. He even added titles like Amazonius, claiming victory over the mythical Amazon warriors, and Exuperatorius, meaning supreme or surpassing all others. Every coin that passed through a merchant's hand or a soldier's purse was a piece of propaganda, a tiny reminder of the emperor's self-proclaimed godhood. But his divine ambitions didn't stop with Hercules. Commodus also declared himself the new Romulus, the mythical founder of Rome. Bidoinctis, he was claiming to be not just the protector of the city, like Hercules, but its second founder, its recreator. This was an audacious claim. Romulus was a figure of foundational myth, a character who existed at the dawn of Roman history. For a living emperor to equate himself with such a figure was seen by many in the Senate as the ultimate act of hubris. To celebrate his status as the new Romulus, Commodus decided that the city of Rome itself needed a new name. It would no longer be known as Rome. Instead, it was to be officially renamed Colonia Lucia Annia Comediana. The city was to be a colony named after him. The months of the year were also renamed in his honor, each one corresponding to one of his many titles: Lucius, Elios, Aurelius, Commodus, Augustus, Herculeus, Romanus, and so on. The Roman people themselves were to be called the Commodiani. The entire empire was being remade into a personal cult dedicated to its delusional leader. This wasn't just a rebranding exercise. Statues of Commodus as Hercules were erected all over the city and throughout the empire. One particularly colossal statue, originally of the Emperor Nero, was repurposed. Its head was replaced with a portrait of Commodus, and it was moved to stand near the Colosseum, a constant, towering reminder of his divine presence. The Senate, once a powerful and respected institution, was forced to play along. Senators had to offer sacrifices to his statues and officially recognize his divine status. Any opposition was met with suspicion, exile, or worse. Fear, not genuine belief, was the foundation of this new state religion. His obsession with Hercules also extended to his favorite pastime, the gladiatorial games. But Commodus wasn't content to just watch from the imperial box. He descended into the arena himself. This was a scandalous act. Gladiators were typically slaves or prisoners, the lowest of the low in Roman society. For an emperor to fight in the arena was a shocking violation of class and dignity. But in his mind, he wasn't a gladiator. He was Hercules, performing his heroic feats for the adoring Messiah. Of course, these fights were heavily staged. His opponents were often poorly armed, sometimes even tethered to the ground, or were simply wild animals that he could shoot with a bow and arrow from a safe platform. He would charge the state an exorbitant fia million sesterces for each appearance, bankrupting the Roman treasury for the sake of his own theatrical performances. The Roman people, who once cheered for him, began to see the spectacle for what it was, a farce. While some were entertained, many were disgusted by the sight of their emperor debasing his office in such a public and pathetic way. The cult of Commodus was a symptom of a much deeper problem. His reign marked the end of the Pax Romana, a long period of relative peace and stability. His self-obsession meant that the real issues of the empire, border security, economic troubles, political corruption, were completely ignored. While he was playing Hercules in the Colosseum, the empire was slowly beginning to crumble. His advisors and officials who tried to govern responsibly were often pushed aside in favor of sycophants who would indulge his fantasies. The delusion reached its peak in his final years. He planned to celebrate his inauguration as consul on January 1st, 193 AD, not by dressing as a consul, but by emerging from the gladiators' barracks, fully kitted out for combat. For the remaining members of the Roman elite, this was the final straw. They had tolerated his divine claims, his renaming of the city, and his squandering of the treasury. But the idea of the emperor officially beginning his term as a gladiator was a humiliation too far. It was an insult to the very idea of Rome. A conspiracy was formed, involving his own mistress, Marcia, his chamberlain, and the Praetorian prefect. On New Year's Eve, 192 AD, they acted. Marcia first tried to poison him, but Commodus vomited up the poison, not taking any chances. The conspirators then sent in his personal wrestling partner, an athlete named Narcissus, who strangled the self-proclaimed god in his bath. The death of Commodus was met with jubilation by the Senate. They immediately declared him a public enemy, and a damnatio memoria was issued, a damnation of memory. His statues were torn down, his name was chiseled off inscriptions, and the city and months were restored to their original names. Rome desperately tried to erase the memory of the emperor who thought he was a god. The cult of Commodus serves as a powerful cautionary tale. It shows what can happen when absolute power is combined with unchecked narcissism. His reign wasn't just a period of bizarre, personal behavior. It was a time when the institutions of the Roman state were bent and broken to serve one man's delusion. The city dedicated to Commodus was a city living a lie, a place where truth was sacrificed at the altar of ego. His fall from God to a damned memory was swift and brutal, a fitting end for an emperor who forgot he was mortal. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the mind of Commodus. It's a fascinating, if terrifying, chapter of Roman history. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more deep dives into the past. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next video. Until next time, stay curious. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving deep into a truly pivotal moment in history, picking up our story in chapter 12. The empire trembles. If you've been following along, you know we've seen empires rise and fall, leaders make their mark, and the incredible complexity of ancient societies. But what happens when even the strongest foundations start to crack? That's exactly what we're exploring today. We've just come from an era, under the great Marcus Aurelius, that felt like the pinnacle of stability and strength. A golden age, almost. But even the most magnificent structures can weaken over time if not constantly maintained. And that's the reality we now face. The Roman Empire, this colossal entity that seemed invincible, is starting to show serious signs of strain. It's like watching a majestic, ancient tree whose roots run deep, but whose branches are now beginning to sway a little too violently in the wind. First up, let's talk about the frontiers. Imagine these vast, sprawling borders, thousands of miles long, where the might of Rome met the outside world. For generations, these frontiers were meticulously guarded, a clear line between order and perceived chaos. But now, they're weakening. The legions, once the undisputed masters of these territories, are spread thin, Resources are dwindling, and the relentless pressure from various groups beyond the borders is mounting. It's not a sudden collapse, but a gradual erosion, like water wearing down stone. Each skirmish, each raid, each successful breach chips away at that seemingly impenetrable shield, creating vulnerabilities that were once unthinkable. And it's not just external pressure. The rot, as they say, often starts from within. We're seeing a significant rise in corruption spreading through the provinces. Think about it. Vast territories, often far from the central authority of Rome, run by governors and officials who suddenly find themselves with immense power and little direct oversight. This isn't just about a few bad apples. It's a systemic issue. Resources meant for defense, infrastructure, or public welfare are being siphoned off. Justice becomes a commodity, sold to the highest bidder. The local populations, who once looked to Rome for protection and fair governance, now often find themselves exploited and neglected. This erodes trust, fosters resentment, and fundamentally weakens the bond between the people and the empire they're supposed to serve. Compounding this internal decay are the legions themselves. These were the backbone of Rome, the ultimate symbol of its power and discipline. But now, even the legions are revolting. This is a truly alarming development. Imagine the elite fighting force, the very protectors of the state, turning against it. Why would this happen? Often, it's due to arrears in pay, harsh conditions, or simply the recognition that their loyalty is being taken for granted while their leaders grow rich. When soldiers, who are trained to fight and who possess the ultimate power, lose faith in their commanders or the empire itself, the consequences can be catastrophic. These aren't just isolated incidents. These are widespread uprisings that pulled vital forces away from defending the borders and force Rome to fight itself. And what about the lifeblood of any thriving civilization, trade? It's faltering. When frontiers are weak, trade routes become unsafe. When provinces are corrupt, merchants face extortion and instability. When legions are revolting, there's no guarantee of protection for goods or travelers. Imagine the vast network of roads, ports, and markets that stretched across the empire, facilitating the exchange of goods, ideas, and culture. Now, that network is fracturing. Luxuries become scarce. Essential supplies are hard to come by, and the economic engine that powered Rome for centuries begins to sputter. This isn't just about wealth. It's about interconnectedness, about the flow of resources that keep society functioning. When trade falters, the entire system feels the pinch, leading to inflation, unemployment, and widespread discontent. So, when you put all these pieces together, weakening frontiers, rampant corruption, revolting legions, and faltering trade, you see the profound truth. The stability Marcus Aurelius so painstakingly built is beginning to crumble. It's not an overnight collapse, but a slow, agonizing process of neglect. Neglect of the military, neglect of ethical governance, neglect of economic well-being, and ultimately, neglect of the very principles that made Rome great. As a sobering lesson that even the most powerful empires are fragile if their core values and practical maintenance are ignored. This era serves as a powerful reminder that stability is never a given. It requires constant vigilance, ethical leadership, and a commitment to the well-being of all its citizens. The The story of Rome during this period isn't just about its decline. It is about the complex interplay of forces that can either uphold or dismantle even the most formidable structures. What do you think were the most critical factors at play here? Let me know in the comments below. This chapter is just the beginning of a fascinating, albeit challenging, period in Roman history, full of lessons that resonate even today. If you found this deep dive intriguing, please hit that like button, subscribe for more historical journeys, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss our next chapter. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Welcome back to our journey through the twilight of the Antonine dynasty. Today, we're stepping into the shadowy corridors of Emperor Commodus's palace, a place where whispers were weapons and trust was a fatal mistake. This is Chapter 13, Enemies in the Shadows. After the failed assassination attempt by his own sister Lucilla, Commodus was a changed man. The open, athletic youth was gone, replaced by a suspicious and fearful ruler. He retreated from the responsibilities of governing, delegating immense power to his praetorian prefect, Tihidus Perennis. For a time, Perennis was the most powerful man in Rome, second only to the emperor himself. He ran the empire while Commodus indulged his passions for gladiatorial combat and lavish parties. Perennis was efficient, perhaps too efficient. He maintained order, managed the provinces, and kept the machinery of the state running. But in the viper's nest of the imperial court, competence breeds jealousy. Senators who felt their influence waning and rivals who coveted his position began to see him not as a loyal servant, but as a threat. They started planting seeds of doubt in the emperor's mind, a mind already fertile ground for paranoia. The whispers grew louder. Perennis is building his own power base, they'd say. He's placing his own men in key positions. He plans to overthrow you, Caesar, and place his own son on the throne. At first, Commodus might have dismissed these rumors. Perennis had been loyal, but the constant, insidious drip of insinuation began to wear away at his trust. The breaking point came in a moment of high drama. A delegation of 1,500 soldiers from the legions in Britain marched all the way to Rome. They stood before Commodus and presented him with coins they claimed were minted by Perennis's coins bearing the face of his son. They accused the prefect of plotting to usurp the throne. Whether these coins were real or forgeries, we may never know. But for the terrified Commodus, they were proof. The betrayal he feared was real. His reaction was swift and brutal. With the emperor's blessing, the soldiers seized Perennis. There was no trial, no chance to defend himself. The man who had effectively ruled the Roman Empire was executed on the spot, along with his family. The message was clear. No one was safe. Loyalty was no shield against the emperor's fear. With Perennis gone, a power vacuum was created, and into that void stepped a man named Clender. His story is even more remarkable. Clender had been brought to Rome as a Phrygian slave. Through cunning, ambition, and an uncanny ability to please the emperor, he had risen through the ranks of the imperial household. Now, he was about to become the new master of the palace. Commodus saw in Clender what he thought was unwavering, dog-like devotion. Unlike the powerful and aristocratic Perennis, Clender was a former slave who owed everything to the emperor. Surely, he could be trusted. Commodus showered him with honors and authority, eventually making him the new praetorian prefect. Clender had reached the pinnacle of power, a position unimaginable for someone of his origins. But power, especially unchecked power in a corrupt court, has a way of poisoning the soul. Clender quickly proved to be far more rapacious and corrupt than Perennis ever was. He put every office, every title, and every judgment up for sale. Senatorial seats, military commands, governorships, everything had a price. It was said that in a single year, he appointed 25 consuls, all of whom had paid handsomely for the honor. The wealth Clender amassed was obscene. He lived a life of staggering luxury, while the state treasury was drained to fund his greed and the emperor's extravagant games. He was even more insulated and powerful than Perennis had been, controlling all access to the emperor. He surrounded Commodus with sycophants and cronies, further isolating him from reality and from any honest counsel. For a time, this arrangement suited Commodus. Clender managed the tedious affairs of state and ensured a constant flow of money for the emperor's pleasures, while Rome groaned under the weight of corruption. Commodus was wrestling in the arena, living out his fantasy of being the Roman Hercules. He was blind to the storm that was gathering. The people of Rome, however, were not. They felt the sting of Clenda's corruption directly. A severe grain shortage hit the city, and the public, rightly or wrongly, blamed the prefect. They believed he was hoarding grain to drive up prices and further enrich himself. Hunger is a powerful motivator, and the mood in the city turned ugly. The crisis came to a head during the Circensian Games. As the crowds gathered, their hunger turned to rage. A protest erupted, led by a mysterious, unnamed woman who rallied the people. The crowd surged out of the Circus Maximus and marched towards the suburban villa where Commodus was staying, protected by Clender and the Praetorian Guard. They chanted for Clender's head. The Praetorian Guard, loyal to their paymaster, charged the unarmed crowd, cutting down men, women, and children. But the mob was immense and desperate. They fought back, and the protests turned into a bloody street battle that raged through the city. News of the massacre reached Commodus, but Clender likely tried to downplay it, to control the narrative. This time, however, the truth broke through the wall of security. It was Commodus's sister, Fadila, and his favorite mistress, Marcia, who dared to confront him. They ran to him, their hair disheveled, and in a state of panic, they threw themselves at his feet. They told him the horrifying truth. The city was on the brink of revolt, and it was all because of Clender. They warned him that his own throne, his very life, was in danger. Faced with this terrifying reality, Commodus's paranoia, which had once been directed at Berenice, now turned squarely on Clender. The man he had trusted implicitly was now the source of the greatest threat he had ever faced. The spell was broken. In a fit of panic, Commodus ordered Clender's execution. The former slave, who had become the most powerful man in Rome, was seized. His head was cut off, mounted on a pole, and paraded through the streets to appease the furious mob. The fall of Berenice and the fall of Clender revealed a terrifying pattern. Commodus's court had become a revolving door of intrigue and blood. He would elevate a favorite, give them absolute power, and then, consumed by paranoia, strike them down. Each execution only deepened his isolation. Who could he trust now? The aristocrats had betrayed him. The men he raised from nothing had betrayed him. He was an emperor in a golden cage, surrounded by enemies, both real and imagined. This cycle of fear and violence completely detached him from the task of ruling. He retreated further and further into his own world, a world of gladiators, gods, and bloodshed. He saw enemies in every shadow, plots in every whisper. The governance of the vast Roman Empire was no longer his concern. His only concern was survival, and the only person he believed he could rely on was himself. The emperor was alone, armed and dangerous, and the stage was set for the final, tragic act of his reign. Thank you for watching. The story of Commodus is a stark reminder of how fear can destroy a leader in an empire from within. If you found this chapter compelling, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more tales from the annals of history. We'll see you next time as we enter the final days of the Mad Emperor. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving deep into a truly chilling chapter of Roman history, one that casts a long, dark shadow over the reign of Emperor Commodus. Get ready for Chapter 14. The Year of Famine and Fear. A period so tumultuous, it left an indelible mark on the Eternal City. Imagine this. It's 190 AD Rome, the heart of an immense empire. A city that prided itself on its grandeur and stability is teetering on the brink. Not because of invading armies, but because of something far more insidious and personal. Hunger, a devastating food shortage, has gripped the city, tightening its icy hold on every citizen, from the humblest pauper to the wealthiest senator. The granaries are dwindling, prices are skyrocketing, and the once bustling markets are now scenes of desperation and despair. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience. This was an existential crisis, threatening the very fabric of Roman society. The air in Rome during this time wasn't just filled with hunger. It was thick with anger and resentment. People were starving, their children crying, and yet there was a man at the heart of Commodus' inner circle who seemed to be living in unimaginable luxury. Clender was a freedman, a former slave who, through cunning and ambition, had risen to become one of the most powerful and feared figures in the empire. He was Commodus, a Chamberlain, his right-hand man, and essentially the emperor's chief minister. But his power was built on corruption, greed, and ruthless opportunism. He was infamous for selling government positions, exploiting the imperial treasury, and accumulating vast personal wealth, while the common people suffered. As the food crisis worsened, rumors and accusations began to swirl, pointing directly at Clender. Many believed he was deliberately manipulating the grain supply, hoarding resources, or allowing others to do so for personal profit, all while the populace starved. He became the embodiment of everything wrong with Commodus's increasingly erratic and tyrannical rule. The frustration and suffering eventually reached a boiling point. The streets of Rome, usually alive with commerce and conversation, transformed into a volatile powder keg. One day, a massive, seething crowd, driven by hunger and rage, erupted into open revolt. They didn't just protest. They marched with a singular, furious purpose, directing their wrath squarely at Clender. This wasn't an organized rebellion with banners and battle plans. It was an organic, spontaneous explosion of raw human desperation. The people, their bellies empty and their hearts full of bitterness, demanded justice. They demanded accountability, and they demanded Clender's head. This was an unprecedented display of popular fury, a direct challenge to the authority that had allowed such suffering to fester. News of the riots, the widespread chaos, and the direct challenge to his authority quickly reached Emperor Commodus. Now, Commodus was an emperor notorious for his unpredictability, his vanity, and his volatile temper. He was less interested in governing the empire than he was in gladiatorial contests and lavish entertainment. When he heard that his city was in open revolt, and that his favorite, Clender, was the target, his reaction was not one of measured statesmanship, but of sheer, unadulterated fury. He saw the riots not as a symptom of a deeper problem, but as a personal insult, an affront to his imperial majesty. In a fit of rage, without any semblance of due process or calm deliberation, Commodus made a swift and brutal decision. He ordered Clender's execution. This was not a quiet, discreet affair. Clender, the once powerful freedman who had walked the halls of power with arrogant confidence, was publicly apprehended and put to death. His body was reportedly dismembered and dragged through the streets of Rome, a stark grisly warning to anyone who dared to incur the emperor's wrath, or more importantly, to anyone who stood in the way of placating the furious mob. The immediate aftermath was gruesome. The streets, already choked with the dust of riot, now literally ran with blood. The spectacle of Clender's brutal end served its purpose. It temporarily quelled the uprising, momentarily satisfying the public's thirst for retribution. But the underlying fear, the deeper anxiety about Commodus's unpredictable nature, only intensified. The message was clear. Commodus was capable of extreme cruelty, even against his closest allies, if it suited his immediate needs, or if his ego was sufficiently bruised. Following Clender's execution, an eerie, suffocating fear settled over Rome. It wasn't just the fear of hunger anymore. It was a profound, chilling dread of the emperor himself. People were terrified of Commodus's capricious nature, his unpredictable bursts of anger, and his increasingly tyrannical actions. The stability that Rome had known for generations seemed to be crumbling. Citizens whispered in hushed tones, afraid that any criticism, any hint of dissent, could lead to their own swift and brutal demise. The once proud Roman populace found itself living under a cloud of anxiety, always looking over their shoulders, unsure of who to trust or what the next day would bring. The food shortage might have abated slightly with Clender's removal and new arrangements, but the emotional scars, the fear of capricious imperial power, would linger far longer. And what about the Senate? The venerable body that had guided Rome for centuries found itself in an increasingly precarious position. They watched in horror as Commodus's rule spiraled further into despotism. Clender's execution was a stark reminder of their own vulnerability. They couldn't openly defy an emperor who executed his closest advisor on a whim. So, in the hallowed halls of the Senate, the whispers began. They spoke not of strategies or policies, but of portents and curses. They murmured that Rome was no longer blessed, that the gods had turned their backs on the city under Commodus's reign. This wasn't just political dissent. It was a profound spiritual and existential crisis. They genuinely believed that the misfortunes befalling Rome, the famine, the riots, the emperor's cruelty, were signs that the empire was cursed, doomed to suffer under the rule of a man they increasingly saw as unfit, perhaps even unholy. These whispers, though quiet, were powerful. They sowed seeds of doubt and discontent, not just among the elite, but subtly influencing the entire populace, further eroding Commodus's legitimacy. So, in 190 AD, Rome experienced a catastrophic convergence of events: the devastating famine, violent popular riots, the brutal execution of a powerful minister, and the descent of the city into a chilling grip of fear. It was a stark testament to the fragility of even the greatest empires when leadership falters and tyranny takes hold. The year of famine and fear was a pivotal moment, shaking Rome to its foundations and setting the stage for even more turbulent times ahead. It showed that even without external threats, internal corruption, and incompetent, tyrannical rule could bring an empire to its knees. The fear that permeated Rome in 190 AD wasn't just a fleeting emotion. It was a deeply ingrained sense of instability and doom that would continue to haunt the city for years to come. What do you think about this dark chapter in Rome's history? Let me know in the comments below. Did Commodus do the right thing by executing Clender, or was it just another act of tyranny? Your insights are always welcome. If you enjoyed this deep dive into ancient Rome, please hit that like button and consider subscribing to the channel for more historical explorations. We've got plenty more fascinating stories to uncover. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next chapter. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. We're diving deep into some truly wild history today, picking up right where we left off in the saga of Emperor Commodus. If you thought things couldn't get crazier, buckle up, because this chapter, Marcia and the final plot, is a game. We're about to meet a woman who held a unique position of power and influence, only to find herself fighting for her very life. Imagine being Commodus's mistress. Not just any mistress, but Marcia, a woman who had a special place in his heart, or at least in his court. For years, she was loyal, a trusted companion, perhaps even someone who genuinely cared for the eccentric emperor. Her influence was significant. She wasn't just a fleeting presence, but a constant figure by his side, whispering in his ear, offering advice, and navigating the treacherous waters of the Roman court. She was even a Christian, which in itself was remarkable. Given Commodus's unpredictable nature, she tried to soften his harsher edges, to guide him towards more benevolent actions. She used her position to protect others, to advocate for clemency when she could. But even loyalty has its limits, especially when dealing with a ruler as erratic and paranoid as Commodus. As his reign spiraled further into madness, marked by gladiatorial performances in the arena, increasingly bizarre public appearances, and a growing disconnect from the realities of governing, Marcia's disillusionment grew. The man she knew, or thought she knew, was transforming into a tyrant, someone dangerous and unpredictable. She witnessed his cruelty firsthand, his increasingly irrational decisions, and the constant fear that permeated the imperial palace. The Roman Empire, under his stewardship, was teetering on the brink, and the stability she once enjoyed began to crumble around her. Then came the moment that changed everything. One fateful night, likely after a particularly decadent feast or a lengthy gladiatorial spectacle, Commodus, in a fit of arrogance or perhaps drunken carelessness, left a tablet lying around. It was a tablet containing a list, a terrifying roll call of individuals marked for execution, and among the names, clear as day, was Marcia. Her name, the woman who had been loyal to him, who had stood by his side, was now slated to be removed. Can you imagine the shock? Betrayal? The cold, visceral fear that must have washed over her as she read her own name on that death warrant. This wasn't just a threat. It was a definitive decree from the emperor himself. Her loyalty, her influence, her very life meant nothing to him in his increasingly deranged state. The revelation was stark. She was disposable. And in that moment, the last vestiges of her affection or commitment to Commodus shattered. Survival became her only imperative. She knew that if she didn't act, and act quickly, her fate was sealed. The palace, once a place of comfort and power, had become a gilded cage, and she was trapped. But Marcia was not alone in her despair. The emperor's erratic behavior and brutal policies had alienated many powerful figures within the court. Among them was Quintus Aemilius Letus, the Praetorian prefect. Letus was essentially the head of the imperial guard, a man with immense military power and direct access to the emperor. He was responsible for the emperor's safety, but also keenly aware of Commodus's dangerous instability and the threat it posed to the empire, and indeed, to his own position. He had witnessed Commodus's decline firsthand, and likely feared for his own head with every passing day. The Praetorian Guard, the elite soldiers meant to protect the emperor, were also growing restless under Commodus's increasingly whimsical and cruel rule. Then there was Eclectus, the chamberlain. As the emperor, issa personal attendant Eclectus was always close by, privy to Commodus's most private moments and most dangerous whims. He saw the emperor's true nature unveiled behind closed doors, without the veneer of public performance. Like Letus, Eclectus understood the precariousness of their situation. Being so close to a madman meant constant danger, and his own life could be forfeit at any moment for the slightest perceived offense. He was a man who understood the intricate workings of the palace, the hidden passages, the daily routines, and the vulnerabilities of the imperial household. These three individuals, Marcia, the disillusioned mistress, Letus, the powerful Praetorian prefect, and Eclectus, the intimate chamberlain, formed an unlikely alliance, bound by a common enemy and a shared desperation for survival. The discovery of Marcia's name on that execution list wasn't just about her. It was a stark warning to all of them. If Commodus could turn on his loyal mistress, who was safe, they realized that Commodus's madness had reached a critical point, and if they didn't act, the empire and their own lives would be irrevocably destroyed. The plot began to form, a desperate scheme hatched in hushed tones and clandestine meetings within the very walls of the palace. They knew the risks. Failure meant excruciating torture and a horrific death, but success meant liberation, not just for themselves, but potentially for Rome itself. They had to be meticulous, precise, and utterly ruthless. The stakes couldn't have been higher. They couldn't simply wait for Commodus to sign another death warrant. They had to be proactive. So, what was their plan? How did they intend to take down one of the most powerful men in the world, an emperor surrounded by guards, whose every move was watched? The details of their conspiracy had to be ironclad. They couldn't afford any slip-ups. They considered various methods, each carrying its own dangers. Direct confrontation was out of the question. Commodus was physically imposing and always had guards nearby. A public assassination would be too chaotic and difficult to control. They needed something subtle, something that could be carried out under the very nose of the imperial court. Their gaze soon fell upon a method as old as treachery itself: poison. This would allow them to act discreetly, without drawing immediate suspicion. The challenge, of course, was administering it effectively and without arousing Commodus's paranoia. Eclectus, with his intimate access, and Marcia, with her trusted position, were key. They knew Commodus's habits, his routines, his preferences for food and drink. They began to lay the groundwork, preparing for the opportune moment. The atmosphere in the palace must have been incredibly tense during this period. Every glance, every whispered conversation, every shadow could have been a sign of discovery. Yet, these three individuals, fueled by fear, anger, and a desperate hope for a different future, pressed on. Their resolve hardened with every passing day as Commodus's behavior grew more outrageous. He had even planned to make a public spectacle of himself, appearing as a gladiator on New Year's Day, bringing further shame upon the imperial office. This final act of degradation solidified their belief that he had to be stopped. The day arrived. On New Year's Eve, the conspirators put their plan into action. Marcia, using her position as his mistress, prepared a special cup of wine for Commodus. Whether it was a drink he specifically requested or a gesture of affection, it was presented in a way that would raise no suspicion, and in that cup, unbeknownst to the emperor, was a potent poison. Commodus, accustomed to the indulgences of his lifestyle, drank it down. But fate, or perhaps the emperor's immense constitution, played a cruel trick. The poison, while powerful, didn't act as swiftly as they had hoped. Commodus became ill, vomiting violently, but he didn't die immediately. Panic must have gripped the conspirators. Their carefully laid plan was faltering. The emperor, though incapacitated, was still alive, and if he recovered, their lives would be forfeit in the most brutal ways imaginable. This unexpected turn of events demanded a rapid, decisive second act. Laetus and Eclectus, realizing the critical failure of the poison, knew they had to finish the job quickly before Commodus could recover and expose them. They needed someone who could act swiftly and without question. They turned to Narcissus, an athlete and wrestler who was often in Commodus's employ, sometimes even his wrestling partner. Narcissus was known for his strength and discretion. Laetus and Eclectus approached Narcissus, explaining the gravity of the situation and, no doubt, offering him a substantial reward, or perhaps threatening him if he refused. Faced with the choice of risking his life by aiding the plot or facing the wrath of a recovering Commodus, Narcissus agreed. He was brought into the emperor's private chambers, where Commodus lay recovering from the poison. What happened next was swift and brutal. Narcissus, a man of immense physical power, entered the room and strangled Commodus to death. The emperor, who had survived countless assassination attempts, who reveled in gladiatorial combat, met his end not in a grand arena, but quietly, ignominiously, at the hands of one of his own retainers. The long, terrifying reign of Emperor Commodus was finally over. The aftermath was immediate and decisive. The conspirators acted quickly to secure power. Laetus ensured that Pertinax, an experienced and respected senator, was proclaimed the new emperor. The body of Commodus was secretly removed, his public image swiftly tarnished, declared a public enemy, and his name erased from monuments. The Roman world breathed a collective sigh of relief, temporarily freed from the tyranny of its most erratic ruler, Marcus Aurelius and Eclectus. By taking such a monumental risk, had indeed saved their own lives and, arguably, rescued the empire from further degradation. However, their triumph was short-lived. The political landscape of Rome remained volatile. Pertinax's reign was brief, and the period that followed, known as the Year of the Five Emperors, plunged Rome into further instability. These key figures in Commodus's assassination, who had once held so much power and influence, ultimately met their own tragic ends. In the subsequent power struggles, their desperate act, while ending Commodus's madness, didn't usher in an era of peace, but merely shifted the Game of Thrones. This story of Marcus Aurelius and Eclectus is a powerful reminder of the extreme lengths people will go to when faced with existential threats, especially within the cutthroat world of imperial politics. It shows how even the most loyal can be pushed to betrayal when their own survival is at stake. What do you think about Marcia's actions? Was she a hero, a villain, or simply a survivor? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed this deep dive into ancient Roman intrigue, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible historical tales. Your support really helps us bring these stories to life. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving deep into a moment in Roman history so wild, so unbelievable. It sounds like something straight out of a Hollywood script. We're talking about the twilight of an emperor whose reign redefined madness and the dramatic, brutal end that shook an empire. Get ready for Chapter 16, The Last Arena. Imagine this. It's the cusp of a new year. 193 at Rome, the heart of an immense empire, is buzzing not with excitement for the future, but with a palpable, chilling dread. The reason, Emperor Commodus. Now, Commodus wasn't your typical stoic, marble-bust-worthy Roman leader. Oh no. This guy had a flair for the dramatic, a fascination with the arena, and a growing detachment from reality that left the entire empire, from its furthest reaches to its very capital, trembling. Commodus had a particular obsession. Hercules, the legendary demigod, strong, powerful, conquering. He saw himself as a living embodiment of Hercules, even going so far as to dress up in lion skin and carry a club, just like his mythical hero. But this wasn't just a costume party. Commodus intended to take this persona into the most public and dangerous spectacle Rome had to offer, the gladiatorial arena, and not just any time. He planned to make his grand, horrifying debut as a gladiator on New Year's Day. 193. Can you even begin to picture the scene? The Emperor of Rome, the supposed divine ruler, descending into the sand. Not to preside, but to fight. It was an insult to the dignity of the office, a desecration of tradition, and frankly, a deeply unsettling display of his deteriorating sanity. The elite of Rome, the senators, the generals, the wealthy citizens. They were again. Whispers turned to desperate conversations, and desperation turned to a terrifying plot. Enter Marcia, Commodus's mistress. She wasn't just any mistress. She held significant influence and was a trusted confidant, but even her loyalty had its limits, especially when faced with an emperor whose actions threatened to unravel everything she knew. She witnessed firsthand the depths of his narcissism, his cruelty, and his increasingly erratic behavior. The planned gladiatorial spectacle was the final straw. It wasn't just bizarre. It was dangerous for the stability of Rome itself. Something had to be done. That fateful night, as Commodus prepared for what he envisioned as his glorious gladiatorial debut, Marcia made her move. She procured a potent poison, mixed it into his wine, and offered it to him. Imagine the tension in that room. The emperor, oblivious, perhaps recounting his plans for the arena, while the woman he trusted handed him his own demise. He drank it. The poison, intended to swiftly end his reign and his life, began its work. However, fate, or perhaps a stroke of Roman bad luck for Marcia, intervened. The poison didn't work as quickly or as decisively as she had hoped. Commodus fell ill, violently so, but he wasn't dead. The plot had been initiated, but not completed. Panic must have surged through Marcia and her co-conspirators. The emperor was sick, yes, but he was alive, and if he recovered, their lives, and the fate of Rome, would be in even greater peril. They needed a more definitive solution, and they needed it immediately. This is where another key player enters the stage. Narcissus. Narcissus wasn't just a random accomplice. He was Commodus's wrestling partner, a strong, athletic man who regularly sparred with the emperor. He was physically powerful and had close access to Commodus, making him the perfect, albeit terrifying, instrument for the final act of this drama. With Commodus still alive and suffering from the poison, Narcissus was brought in. The scene shifted to Commodus's private bath, a place of relaxation and vulnerability. It was there, amidst the steam and privacy, that Narcissus carried out the chilling command. He overpowered the weakened emperor, and with his bare hands, strangled Commodus to death. And just like that, the curtain fell on one of Rome's most infamous emperors. The man who saw himself as Hercules, who wanted to fight as a gladiator on New Year's Day, met his end not in a glorious arena battle, but in the quiet, brutal confines of his own bath at the hands of a trusted wrestler. His death, on December 31st, 192 AD, prevented his New Year's Day spectacle, but it also plunged Rome into a new period of instability. The empire, which had trembled at his madness, now faced the aftermath of his assassination. The year 193 AD would become known as the Year of the Five Emperors, a chaotic period of civil war as various contenders vied for the vacant throne. Commodus' reign was a stark reminder of the perils of unchecked power and the delicate balance required to govern an empire. His story remains a chilling chapter in Roman history, a testament to how quickly an emperor's personal delusions can unravel an entire civilization. What do you think about Commodus' reign and his dramatic end? Was Marcia justified in her actions? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this dive into ancient Rome as fascinating as I did, please hit that like button, share this video with your fellow history buffs, and don't forget to subscribe for more intriguing stories from the past. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next chapter. The palace is silent. So utterly, profoundly silent whost hours ago. This place throbbed with the forced adulation of a living god. Now, that god lies cold, and the silence he leaves behind is heavier than any stone in this city. It's a quiet that seeps into the very marble. A stillness broken only by the hesitant, echoing footsteps of those who once scurried in his shadow. Imagine the scene. The Praetorian Guard, The very men sworn to protect him now stand with uncertain eyes, their hands resting on hilts that feel suddenly useless. The servants, who once moved with a practiced, fearful speed, now creep along the walls, their faces a mixture of relief and terror. What happens now? What happens when the sun, which he claimed as his brother, rises on a Rome without its divine ruler? This wasn't just a man. Here was an idea, a terrifying, grandiose delusion that held an entire empire in its grip. He declared himself Jupiter on earth, demanding that statues of the gods be decapitated and his own head placed upon their shoulders. He built bridges across the sea for a single, pointless parade. He spoke to the moon as an equal and whispered threats to the statues in the Forum. Rome, the eternal city, the seat of reason and law, was held hostage by the whims of a madman convinced of his own divinity. And now, he's gone, not struck down by a bolt of lightning from his celestial rival, but by the cold, sharp steel of men who had simply had enough. The god was mortal after all. His blood, which he claimed was ichor, stains the mosaic floors just like any other man's. It's a shocking, almost blasphemous realization for those who lived under his reign. As the first light of dawn spills over the 7 hills, the news begins to trickle out. First as a hushed whisper in the barracks, then a rumor passed between market stalls, and finally, a roar that sweeps through the city. He's dead. The god is dead, but there is no celebration. Not yet. The silence of the palace spreads into the city itself. People open their shutters and look at their neighbors, searching for a sign, for a permission to feel something other than fear. For years, every word, every glance was scrutinized. Praising the wrong poet or failing to applaud with sufficient vigor could mean death. They learned to live with a knot of anxiety in their stomachs, a permanent tension that has now, suddenly, been released. The air in Rome feels different. It's as if the entire city can finally take a full, deep breath. The weight of his oppressive ego has been lifted. Think of the senators who were forced to prostrate themselves before him, to offer him incense as if he were a true deity. This morning, they wake in their villas. And for the first time in years, they don't have to rehearse the groveling they will perform at court. They are no longer supplicants to a lunatic. They are, once again, the leaders of Rome. The irony is staggering. The man who saw himself as a mortal, who built monuments to his own eternal glory, is now just a corpse. His end wasn't a grand, epic tragedy. It was a squalid, desperate affair in a palace corridor. A man undone not by the gods he challenged, but by his own humanity, his own vulnerability. He tried to rise above mankind, and in doing so, he forgot the most fundamental rule. Even gods can bleed. And what of his legacy? The statues will be torn down. His name will be scratched from public records in an act the Romans called damnatio memoria, the damnation of memory. They will try to erase him, to pretend this bizarre and bloody chapter never happened. But you can't erase a scar. Rome will remember. It will remember how easily a republic can fall to a tyrant, how quickly reason can be replaced by madness, and how a man through sheer force of will and terror can convince a city of millions that he is a god. The silence in the palace is the sound of a fever breaking. It's the quiet after the storm, the eerie calm that follows a great and terrible noise. The marble corridors no longer echo with the demands of a deity, but with the footsteps of mortals left to clean up the mess. Rome awakens not to the rule of a god, but to the messy, complicated, and ultimately more hopeful business of being human again. The god is dead. Long live the city. Thank you so much for journeying back in time with me today. If you find these stories from the past as fascinating as I do, consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell. It truly helps the channel grow and ensures you won't miss our next exploration into history. See you next time. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're rediving headfirst into one of the most dramatic and utterly satisfying moments in Roman history. Chapter 8, The Senate's Revenge. This isn't just a story, it's a monumental act of defiance, a visceral response to tyranny, and a testament to the power of collective memory, or, in this case, its deliberate destruction. You know, Commodus, the emperor who fancied himself a gladiator and believed he was the reincarnation of Hercules, the one who dragged Rome through years of increasingly erratic and brutal rule. Well, his reign finally ended, not with a bang of glory, but with a whimper of assassination. And let me tell you, the Roman Senate had been holding their breath for this moment, stewing in silent fury for far too long. Imagine the atmosphere in Rome the day after Commodus' death. There's relief, yes. A collective sigh of freedom from a despot, but beneath that relief simmered a deep, burning resentment. The Senate, once a respected body, had been humiliated, threatened, and sidelined by Commodus. Now, their moment had come. And they didn't just want him gone. They wanted him erased. So, what exactly did they do? They combined, probably with an energy they hadn't felt in years, and delivered the ultimate judgment, a formal condemnation of Commodus' memory. This wasn't just a political move. It was a psychological purge, a declaration that his very existence was an affront to Rome. They branded him an enemy of the state, a title reserved for the most reviled figures in Roman history. And this condemnation wasn't just words spoken in the hallowed halls of the Senate. Oh, no. They took it to the streets. The most visible symbols of his power and his ego, his countless statues, became targets. Can you picture it? Crowds gathering, perhaps a mix of angry citizens and zealous soldiers, pulling ropes, chisels flying, as Commodus' marble likenesses toppled to the ground, shattering into fragments. Imagine the cheers, the catharsis, as these symbols of oppression were literally smashed to pieces. It wasn't just stone. It was the physical embodiment of their suffering being dismantled. But tearing down statues was only the beginning. The Senate went a step further, ordering the erasure of his name from public records, inscriptions, and monuments. This was a deliberate act of historical nullification. Any mention of him, any honor bestowed upon him, was to be systematically removed. His official titles, his family lineage, even the years named after him, all scrubbed away as if he had never existed. This process has a name, a chillingly effective one: damnatio memoria, the condemnation of memory. It's more than just a punishment. It's an attempt to rewrite history, to deny a person their place in the collective consciousness. Think about the sheer scale of this undertaking. Rome was a city plastered with public inscriptions, triumphal arches, and monuments. Every official document, every public building that bore his mark, had to be altered. Imagine the scribes painstakingly carving out his name, leaving behind telltale blank spaces or awkward rephrased texts. These visible scars on Rome's historical fabric serve as stark reminders, even today, of this profound act of erasure. The Senate's motivation here was clear. They wanted to send an undeniable message, not just to the people of Rome, but to future emperors. Rule justly, rule wisely, or face not just death, but oblivion. They were reclaiming control of the narrative, asserting their power to define who belonged in Rome, as pantheon of heroes, and who deserved to be cast into the abyss of forgotten villains. And this wasn't just about punishing Commodus, it was also about healing Rome. The years under his rule had been traumatic, chaotic, and deeply unsettling. By systematically dismantling his legacy, the Senate was attempting to cleanse the city, to restore a sense of order and dignity that had been so grievously violated. It was a symbolic purification, an effort to move past the nightmare of his reign and begin anew. Of course, damnatio memoria, wasn't always perfectly successful. As archaeologists and historians, we often find traces of these erased names, faint outlines where a name once stood, revealing the very act of destruction. These ghostly imprints are fascinating because they tell us two stories: the story of the person who was condemned, and the story of the people who condemned them. They remind us that even the most determined efforts to erase history can leave behind compelling clues. So, the next time you hear about Commodus, remember not just his bizarre reign, but also the powerful and definitive act of the Senate's revenge. It's a vivid illustration of how a community can collectively reject tyranny, and how memory, both individual and collective, plays a crucial role in shaping our understanding of the past. It's a powerful lesson, that even in ancient times, the people, through their representatives, could rise up and reclaim their narrative. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through Roman history. If you found this dive into the Senatus' dramatic act of defiance as fascinating as I did, please hit that like button. Share this video with your fellow history buffs, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the ancient world. Your support means the world to me, and I can't wait to explore more incredible stories with you soon. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving deep into a pivotal moment in Roman history, a turning point that forever reshaped the destiny of an empire. Get ready to explore the end of an era. For centuries, Rome had basked in the golden glow of the Nervantine dynasty, a period often hailed as Rome's peak. Emperors like Trajan, Hadrian, and Marcus Aurelius guided the empire through unprecedented stability and prosperity. But, as with all golden ages, this one had to end, and it ended dramatically with the death of Emperor Commodus. Now, Commodus, as you might remember, was Marcus Aurelius' son, and his reign was, well, let's just say it was a stark contrast to his father's. He was less interested in governing and more interested in gladiatorial combat and lavish self. His assassination in 192 AD wasn't just the end of a controversial emperor. It was the final, jarring chord in the symphony of the Nervantine dynasty. Imagine the shockwaves this sent through Rome. This wasn't just a change of leadership. It was the abrupt termination of a line of succession that had brought such stability. It ripped away the comforting predictability that had defined imperial rule for nearly a century. The Roman people, and indeed the entire empire, suddenly faced an uncertain future, a vacuum of power that threatened to swallow everything. And oh boy, did it ever. Commodus's death didn't just end a dynasty, it signaled the start of a much larger, more ominous decline for the Roman Empire. The cracks that had perhaps been forming beneath the surface during his chaotic reign suddenly became chasms. The carefully constructed edifice of Roman order began to crumble, bricked by fragile brick. What followed Commodus's demise was nothing short of pandemonium. The year 193 AD is infamously known as the Year of the Five Emperors. Can you imagine? 5 different men claiming the imperial title in just 12 months. It was a dizzying, violent, and utterly destabilizing period. First, there was Pertinax, who tried to bring back some of Marcus Aurelius' austere governance but only lasted 86 days before being murdered by the Praetorian Guard. Then, the Praetorians, actually, auctioned off the emperorship to the highest bidder. Didius, yes, you heard that right, auctioned off the throne of the most powerful empire in the world. Meanwhile, 3 powerful generals stationed in different provinces, Septimius Severus in Pannonia, Pesenius Niger in Syria, and Clodius Albinus in Britannia, saw their chance and declared themselves emperor. The empire was torn apart by civil war, a brutal struggle for supremacy where loyalty was fleeting and ambition was deadly. This wasn't just about who got to wear the purple. It was a fundamental breakdown of the Roman political system. The army, once the protector of the empire, became its kingmaker, or rather, its kingbreaker. The power shifted decisively from the Senate and the established institutions to the legions and their ambitious commanders. The Year of the Five Emperors was a brutal wake-up call. It showcased just how fragile the empire's foundation had become. The civil wars drained resources, destabilized provinces, and eroded the morale of the populace. This chaos replaced the order that had been Rome's hallmark for so long. The Golden Age was unequivocally gone. This era marked the beginning of what historians often refer to as the crisis of the 3rd century, a period of intense internal strife, economic collapse, and external invasions that would push Rome to its absolute limits. The empire would endure, but it would never again recapture the glory and stability of the Nervantine period. The damage was done. The pattern was set. Commodus's reign and subsequent death, followed by the Year of the Five Emperors, serves as a powerful historical lesson. It demonstrates how quickly stability can erode when leadership fails, when internal divisions fester, and when the instruments of power become corrupted. It shows us that even the mightiest empires are vulnerable to internal rot. So, While we look back at the Nerva-Antonine dynasty as a golden age, it's crucial to understand how it ended, and the tumultuous period that immediately followed. It's a reminder that history is a dynamic, ever-changing narrative, and even the most glorious chapters eventually draw to a close, paving the way for new, often challenging, beginnings. What do you think was the biggest factor in Rome's decline after Commodus? Let me know in the comments below. If you found this dive into Roman history insightful, please hit that like button. Share this video with fellow history buffs, and don't forget to subscribe for more journeys through the past. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next chapter. Welcome back. Today, we stand at the precipice of an empire's twilight, examining the life and legacy of a man whose name has become synonymous with tyranny. Commodus. This is not just the story of one emperor's descent into madness. It's a cautionary tale about power, legacy, and the fragility of even the greatest civilizations. So, dim the lights, settle in, and let's journey back to ancient Rome to unravel the legacy of madness. Commodus's rise to power was unlike any other. Born in 161 AD, he was the first Roman emperor born in the purple, meaning his father was already the reigning emperor. His father was none other than Marcus Aurelius, the last of the so-called 5 good emperors. Imagine the weight of that expectation. From the moment he drew breath, Commodus was destined to rule the most powerful empire the world had ever seen. Marcus Aurelius, a man who prized duty, discipline, and stoic philosophy, spared no expense on his son's education. The finest tutors in rhetoric, history, and military strategy were brought in to mold the young prince into a worthy successor. He was even made co-emperor at the age of 16, a move intended to ensure a smooth transition of power. But as we'll see, the best-laid plans of emperors and fathers can often go astray. The golden age of Rome was drawing to a close, and the boy who was meant to continue it would instead be the one to bring the curtain down. The death of Marcus Aurelius in 180 AD marked a pivotal turning point, not just for Commodus, but for the entire Roman Empire. The philosopher-king died on the northern frontier in the midst of a grueling war. His final wish was for his son to see the campaign through to victory. But Commodus, now sole emperor, at just 18 years old, had other ideas. He quickly negotiated a peace treaty, one that many in the Senate considered a dishonorable retreat. He abandoned the hard-won territories and rushed back to Rome, eager to trade the harsh realities of the battlefield for the lavish comforts of the capital. This first major decision set the tone for his entire reign. It was a clear rejection of his father's values of duty and perseverance in favor of personal pleasure and immediate gratification. The soldiers, who had adored Marcus Aurelius, were initially loyal to his son. The people of Rome, tired of endless wars, welcomed him home with a triumphal parade. But for the old guard, the senators who had served his father, this was a deeply unsettling sign of things to come. The era of stoic leadership was over. The age of spectacle had begun. Once back in Rome, Commodus's true nature began to reveal itself. He had little interest in the day-to-day administration of the empire. He delegated matters of state to a succession of favorites and prefects, many of whom were corrupt and used their power to enrich themselves. This hands-off approach led to widespread mismanagement and growing discontent. But while the empire's affairs languished, Commodus was busy cultivating his own interests. He was obsessed with gladiatorial combat. This wasn't just a casual hobby. He saw himself as a gladiator, the supreme warrior. He would enter the arena himself, fighting against terrified opponents who knew they couldn't win, or slaughtering exotic animals for the crowd's amusement. He even renamed Rome Colonia Commodiana and declared himself the new Romulus. To the traditional Roman elite, this was an abomination. The emperor, the father of the state, was behaving like a common entertainer, degrading the highest office in the land. He demanded to be worshipped as a living god, styling himself as the reincarnation of Hercules. Complete with a lion-skin cloak and a club, his narcissism knew no bounds, and his paranoia grew with every passing day. As Commodus retreated further into his fantasy world, the real world grew more dangerous for those around him. A failed assassination attempt in 182 AD, allegedly orchestrated by his own sister Lucilla, shattered any remaining sense of security. From that point on, his reign descended into a bloody terror. He saw conspiracies everywhere. Senators, advisors, and even family members were executed on the flimsiest of pretexts. His reliance on informers created a climate of fear where no one was safe. He would confiscate the property of his victims to fund his extravagant lifestyle and games, further alienating the aristocracy. The government was essentially run by his Praetorian prefect, Perennis, and later by a freedman named Clender, both of whom were notoriously corrupt. Clender even sold public offices, including Senate seats, to the highest bidder. This period was marked by chaos, with riots breaking out in Rome over food shortages, a direct result of the government's incompetence. Commodus remained blissfully detached from it all, more concerned with his next performance in the Colosseum than the welfare of his people. The empire was bleeding, and the emperor was playing games. The end, when it came, was as sordid as his reign. By 192 AD, the most powerful people in Rome had had enough. His own mistress, Marcia, the new Praetorian prefect, and his chamberlain conspired to eliminate him. Their first attempt, using poison, failed when Commodus vomited it up. Desperate, the conspirators turned to Plan B. They hired a professional wrestler named Narcissus, who was also Commodus's personal trainer. On New Year's Eve, as Commodus prepared for his bath, Narcissus entered and strangled the emperor to death. The man who saw himself as Hercules, a demigod on earth, died not in glorious battle, but in a private, ignominious struggle. His death was met with relief and joy, especially by the Senate, which immediately declared him a public enemy and ordered that his name be erased from all public inscriptions. The golden age that began with Nerva had ended in a bathtub, and Rome was plunged into a brutal civil war, known as the Year of the Five Emperors. Commodus's reign was not just a failure, it was a catastrophe that shattered the stability of the Pax Romana and set the stage for the crisis of the 3rd century. So, as the candles of history fade on this tragic chapter, we are left to ponder the legacy of Commodus. What created this monster? Was he simply a product of extreme luxury? A boy who was given everything and valued nothing? Was he crushed by the impossible greatness of his father's shadow? A burden too heavy for any son to bear? Or was his reign something more, a symptom of a deeper decay? A stark and brutal warning that no power is absolute and no empire, no matter how mighty, is eternal. Perhaps the most fitting epitaph comes from his own father, Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-king who saw the world with such clarity. In his private meditations, he wrote a line that echoes through the centuries, a quiet truth that outlasted all of Rome's marble and gold. He wrote, "All is ephemeral fame, and the famous alike. A hauntingly perfect lullaby for an empire's fading light, and for the sun who burned it all down." Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the past. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into history. We'll see you next time.